In 1990, Martin Scorsese released a movie that would redefine the gangster genre in perpetuity. Goodfellas wasn't merely another mob film. It was a frenzied, cocaine-fueled runaway through 3 decades of mafia existence that left viewers gasping and film history irreparably altered. The movie crashed onto screens with an intensity that critics, filmmakers, and viewers continue to experience today. But what everybody didn't know was that the true tale, the off-camera story, was even more appalling, perilous, and volatile than anything that went before the cameras. For years, everyone involved just kept quiet about what actually occurred during filming. They didn't mention the real gangsters who came on set practically every day, or the ad-lib lines that even seasoned crew members feared, or the FBI agents who discreetly came by the filmmakers after the filming of a certain scene. They definitely did not disclose the spine-tingling moment when the real-life mobsters depicted in the movie came to the premiere, seated just rows from the actors who played them. Nowadays, though, with the passage of decades and the insulation provided by time, all those secrets have spilled out. The actors, the director, even the writer of the book that Goodfellas was based on, have confessed things that forever alter how we view Goodfellas. As soon as you know the truth, you will never view the film in the same fashion again. The story begins years before the cameras ever rolled, with a book that almost never became a movie. Before Goodfellas was a cinematic landmark, it was wise guy Nicholas Pileggi's explosive 1985 nonfiction book about the rise and fall of Henry Hill. Pileggi had spent years investigating Hill's story, capturing both the glamour and the rot of mob life. But when Scorsese's agent initially passed along the book, the director wouldn't even bother to open it. "I was finished with crime films," Scorsese would later confess. Following Mean Streets and Raging Bull, he desired to break away from gangsters. The manuscript gathered dust. Months went by. Then, while experiencing a crisis of the personal kind after another massive studio project fell through, Scorsese happened to read Wise Guy. He read it straight through. Overcome, he called Pileggi at 2 in the morning. "I've been waiting for this book my whole life," Scorsese said breathlessly. Pileggi, startled but equally moved, replied, "I've been waiting for your call my whole life." With that late-night phone call, a legendary collaboration was born. But nothing about bringing Wise Guy to the screen was simple. Every studio initially passed. The problem wasn't just the violence, it was the moral ambiguity. There was no good guy, no redemption, no tidy retribution for ill. Producer Irwin Winkler remembered executives insisting, "Where's the good guy? Where's the message?" Scorsese and Pileggi resisted. That was the idea. True mob life had no moral framework, no justice movie style. Warner Brothers eventually gambled, but insisted on constant legal review. After all, most of the criminals featured in the book were still around, some of them even in witness protection. The attorneys almost shut the movie down several times. The answer was to rename people, condense timelines, and composite characters. But despite those safeguards, danger lingered. Henry Hill himself, who was orders away by federal authorities, couldn't keep from slipping onto the set to watch his life reenacted before his very eyes. His appearance wasn't a diversion, it was an actual security threat. "We were playing men who murdered for less than a negative image in a movie," Ray Liotta subsequently confessed. Henry Hill's casting was another fight. The studio demanded stars, Tom Cruise, Alec Baldwin, whoever would open a box office. But Scorsese would not budge on Ray Liotta, an actor who was then hardly known beyond a handful of credits. Liotta campaigned for the role with an odd determination, once stopping to talk to Scorsese in a restaurant and later confronting him at a film festival. "Almost got arrested the 3rd time," Liotta joked afterward, "but I knew I was Henry." What persuaded Scorsese was not celebrity, but the convergence of Liotta's charm and menace, the feeling that something volatile was always percolating beneath the surface of his smile. When Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci signed on, the studio buckled. With Lorraine Bracco as Karen Hill, the elements were set for a tale that seemed less like Hollywood fantasy and more like risky realism. The realism was costly. De Niro phoned actual mobsters in prison to work on Jimmy Conway research, all against federal regulations. Pesci drew upon his own childhood for material, such as one of his most harrowing experiences, in which he said a gangster that he was funny and almost got murdered as a result. That experience was used as the springboard for the most iconic scene in the film, the funny how exchange, an improvisation that frightened even the production staff. Scorsese made Pesci and Liotta improvise it without informing the rest of the cast. Their nervous laughter, their uncertainty, their fear that Pesci might actually explode, every reaction was real. Lorraine Bracco later revealed that Scorsese often gave different, even contradictory directions to each actor before a scene. The confusion, the tension, that was exactly what he wanted, she said. Improvisation wasn't limited to dialogue. In the brutal scene where Pesci's Tommy pistol whips a restaurant owner, Pesci asked Scorsese for just one unscripted take. The disorder that ensued, the actual shock on the faces of extras, the actual fear in their eyes, was what made it onto the screen. Even the climactic scenes of Henry Hill's last day coked out were lived rather than acted. Liotta stayed awake for days straight, no medication, just plain fatigue, so by the time he acted out the paranoia of helicopters and botched drug deals, he was seeing things between scenes. Destructive to my health, Liotta confessed afterwards. Ideal for Henry. But it wasn't just actors taking risks. Genuine gangsters dropped by, unannounced but accepted. Assistant director Joseph Reedy recalled them turning up without warning, observing silently, occasionally supplying minor adjustments. A true wise guy would hold the cigarette this way, one of them instructed. Another corrected the manner in which money was being tallied. Lorraine Bracco remembered someone approaching her in a Little Italy restaurant and handing her detailed critiques of the way Karen Hill was dressed, including jewelry. Bracco only later understood that she'd been talking to someone from the real community. Even wardrobe and accessories fell under scrutiny. Costume designer Richard Bruno remembered one visitor pointing at a suit and saying, "Jimmy wouldn't wear this color." They altered it instantly. At times the visits teetered on confessions, mob-associated guests offhandedly talking about facts regarding crimes never documented in court. Scorsese himself later admitted, "There were days I wasn't sure if we were making a movie about the mob or making it with them." The technical difficulties of Goodfellas extended the limits of filmmaking. The since-famous Copacabana tracking shot 3 uninterrupted minutes after Henry and Karen through the nightclub required a full day of rehearsals and 15 rejected takes. The Steadicam operator was soaked with sweat, walking through thin corridors and well-coordinated choreography. It was like a ballet, cinematographer Michael Ballhaus remembered. The payoff wasn't some shot of one-upmanship. It was a kinetic means of expressing Henry's authority, the world literally opening up for him. Editing innovations such as the jump cuts and freeze frames replicated the rush of adrenaline and paranoia in Henry's mind. Even sound design was revolutionary. Dialogue from future scenes would overflow into the present, capturing Henry's racing, fragmented consciousness. The acting remains some of the best ever committed to film. Liotta didn't judge Henry, playing him not good or bad, but just as a man recounting his own tale. Pesci's Tommy was pure unpredictability, a monster who could shift from laughter to murder in a heartbeat. His performance was so intense it won him an Oscar. De Niro's Jimmy Conway was the opposite, a study in still menace, terrifying in stillness, his eyes doing more than his words ever could. Bracco also declined to play Karen as a victim, preferring instead to show her as complicit, attracted to danger and glamour as much as Henry is. Together, the performances built a world so lived in that it was often closer to documentary than fiction. When Goodfellas opened, the tension carried over. Some of the very gangsters who were shown in the movie walked into the theaters, sitting just a few rows behind the actors who portrayed them. Pileggi recalled sending a note after, "You got it right." Whether it was praise or a threat was never certain. The movie was not only a critical success, but also a box office one, earning $46 million in the United States on a $25 million budget. Its impact was felt right away. Young filmmakers were phoning Scorsese's crew within a few days, not to request employment, but to pose technical questions. How did they execute the tracking shots, the freeze frames, The wall-to-wall soundtrack, Goodfellas, not only achieved success, it remapped the language of cinema. Stylized voiceover narration was used as a character tool, not merely as exposition. Nonlinear narrative was de rigueur. Period-specific music became comment on the narrative. The Sopranos and Pulp Fiction would be impossible without it. The film also prefigured America's affair with the anti-hero. Henry Hill laid the groundwork for Tony Soprano, Walter White, and Don Draper. Heroes who do awful things, but are interesting. For Scorsese, Goodfellas was vindication after a lifetime of fighting. For the cast, it was a blessing and a curse. Liotta spent years being stereotyped as gangsters. Pesci never shook Tommy DeVito out of the public psyche. Bracco was being offered constant mobwife roles that lacked the depth she brought to Karen. And for the Real Henry Hill, the movie became both a blessing and a death warrant. He continued to brag in taverns that he was Goodfellas guy, blowing the cover on his witness protection until finally the government cut him loose from the program, pronouncing him beyond protection. In hindsight, Scorsese confesses he never expected the film to cast so long of a shadow. We were exposing the rot behind the glamour, the hollowness beneath the riches, he said, but few saw the warning, only the excitement of gangster existence. Nevertheless, the legacy of the film holds fast. It is still among the most studied, quoted, and emulated films in the history of America. As Pileggi explained it, the final testament to the film's power came from Henry Hill himself, who confessed that following the release of the film, he couldn't always discern whether his recollections were actual or from the movie. Goodfellas had become more real than reality itself. As far back as most of us can remember, Goodfellas has been more than a movie. It's a high-wire act that caught lightning in a bottle, a risky dance between Hollywood fantasy and underworld reality. From a novel Scorsese hardly ever read to the improvisations that frightened a nation, from the actual gangsters who stalked the set to the technological innovations that revolutionized cinema, its production is as remarkable as the film itself. 3 decades on, Goodfellas remains alive, still dangerous, still up-to-date. It's a masterpiece conceived in risk, in refusal to sugarcoat difficult truths, and in artists unafraid to blur the line between fiction and fact undefined. That's why it's still with us, not as nostalgia, not as period piece, but as a living, breathing reminder of what film can be when it's willing to show us the uncomfortable truth.